Are we seriously considering a complete rewrite of the platform? The system I've spent the last 12 years perfecting? I stared at Marina, our new chief technology officer, in disbelief. She was tapping her pen against that sleek mahogany desk that appeared in her office the day after her promotion. Nadine, you have to understand. Everything is moving to cloud-native architecture these days. Your system, while impressive for its time, just isn't where modern tech needs to be, she replied, not meeting my eyes. Where modern tech needs to be, I repeated quietly, the words tasting bitter. The system hasn't had a single security breach in 12 years. It's processed over $18 billion in transactions. But sure, let's throw it out because it's not trendy enough. My name is Nadine Parker. I'm 46 years old, and until recently, I was the senior systems architect at Northwell Logistics in Eugene, Oregon. I built our internal platform from scratch. Every module, every security feature, every encryption layer. It wasn't flashy, but it was bulletproof. And now, a consultant who'd been with the company for all of 6 weeks was convinced it all needed to go. Marina sighed, finally looking up at me. The board has already approved Elliot's proposal. We're not here to debate whether we're doing the rewrite. We're here to discuss your role in the transition. I felt something shift inside me then. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. In that moment, I knew my days at Northwell were numbered. Let me guess. You want me to document everything, train the new team, and then, what? Move to a strategic advisory role? I made air quotes with my fingers, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Marina had the decency to look uncomfortable. We value your institutional knowledge, Nadine. No one knows the system like you do. But legacy systems are liabilities. Isn't that what Elliot keeps saying in those fancy presentations? I challenged her. She didn't deny it. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk toward me. This is the transition plan. The team will need comprehensive documentation on all core modules within 4 weeks. After that, there will be a knowledge transfer phase of approximately 3 months. I didn't reach for the folder. And then we'll discuss next steps, she said smoothly, politician-like. Translation. We'll show you the door once we've extracted everything we need. As I left Marina's office, I passed Elliot in the hallway. He was wearing another one of his tailored suits, gesturing animatedly as he pitched some new idea to a group of wide-eyed junior developers. His words floated to me. Zero trust architecture, serverless deployment, microservices mesh. I almost smiled. They had no idea what they were getting into. What no one at Northwell seemed to realize, or remember, was that the most critical modules of our platform weren't just code I'd written. They were built on a custom encryption library that I'd personally authored and maintained separately, under a developer license tied specifically to my name. It wasn't company property. It was mine. I headed back to my desk, my mind already calculating exactly how this would play out. I still remember the day I started at Northwell Logistics. It was 2011, and the company was just a scrappy startup with 15 employees working out of a converted warehouse. The platform was a hodgepodge of PHP scripts and Excel macros held together with duct tape and prayer. We need something more robust, Jackson, the founder, had told me during my interview. Something that can scale with us. Something secure. It took me 3 years to build the first complete version of the platform. I worked 80-hour weeks, survived on coffee and determination. The early team used to joke that I was more machine than human, typing away long after everyone else had gone home. Don't you have a life outside of code? Teresa from accounting once asked me. I did, but this was my magnum opus. Every line I wrote, every system I architected, felt like a piece of myself embedded into the company. The platform grew as Northwell grew, from 15 employees to 50, then to hundreds as we expanded across the Pacific Northwest. Our client list went from local businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Throughout it all, my platform held steady, scaling and adapting. The security modules were my particular pride. I developed a custom encryption library after discovering vulnerabilities in some of the standard options. I called it Parker Crypt, my small vanity, and licensed it to Northwell under specific terms. I was meticulous about the licensing agreement, ensuring I maintained authorship and control. It seemed like a technicality at the time. I had no plans to leave after all. Over the years, executives came and went. Jackson sold his stake and moved on to new ventures. The board brought in professional management with MBAs and corporate backgrounds. Suddenly, there were layers of hierarchy where once we all reported directly to the founders. I stayed focused on the platform, adding new modules as needed, hardening security, optimizing performance. It wasn't the most exciting work, but there was satisfaction in maintaining something reliable. Then came the new wave of leadership, including Marina Carver as CTO. She'd come from a high-profile role at a tech giant and clearly had ambitions beyond Northwell. Shortly after her arrival, she brought in Elliot Navarro as a consultant. "He'll help us modernize our approach," she announced at an all-hands meeting. Elliot specializes in digital transformation and cloud migration. I watched as Elliot charmed his way through the company, conducting interviews, hosting workshops, giving presentations filled with buzzwords and colorful charts. He spoke with overwhelming confidence about technologies he clearly only understood superficially. "Your platform is interesting," he told me during our first one-on-one, in a tone that suggested he meant the opposite. "Very monolithic, very 2010. I should have seen the writing on the wall right then. The first real blow came during the quarterly technology review. I was scheduled to present the platform upgrade roadmap I'd been working on for months. Plans to modularize certain components while maintaining the rock-solid security foundation. But when I arrived at the conference room, Elliot was already projecting his slides. "We've taken a deep dive into the current architecture," he was saying, "and identified significant technical debt that's holding Northwell back from true digital agility." I slipped into a seat at the back of the room, watching as Elliot presented what amounted to a complete dismantling of my life's work. He showed complicated diagrams contrasting the legacy monolith, represented by an ominous gray block, with a colorful distributed cloud architecture. "The current system architecture represents significant enterprise risk," he declared, clicking to a slide titled Risk Assessment. "It's vulnerable to single points of failure, limits our ability to leverage cutting-edge cloud services, and frankly, depends too heavily on tribal knowledge." That last point was accompanied by a knowing glance toward me. The subtext was clear. I was the tribe, and my knowledge was a liability, not an asset. "Questions?" Elliot asked, after outlining a proposal for a complete rewrite that would take only 18 months. "Yes," I said, raising my hand. "Have you analyzed the actual performance metrics of the current system, or calculated the security implications of moving our client data to a distributed cloud architecture?" Elliot smiled thinly. "The benefits of cloud-native architecture are well documented in the industry, Nadine. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. "Our current system has maintained 99.997% uptime over the past 5 years and zero security breaches. What's your projected reliability for this new architecture?" The room grew uncomfortable. Marina stepped in before Elliot could respond. "These are details we'll flesh out in the implementation planning," she said smoothly. "Today's session is about strategic direction. In other words, we've already decided, so stop asking inconvenient questions." After the meeting, James from the development team caught up with me in the hallway. He'd been at Northwell almost as long as I had. "That was brutal," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, most of us know the platform isn't the problem." "Politics, man." I nodded, appreciating the solidarity, but recognizing its limits. James had a family to support. He couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of this fight. That evening, I stayed late, alone in the office as usual. I accessed the repository containing the Parker Crypt library and reviewed the licensing terms. Just as I remembered, Northwell had a license to use it, but I retained complete ownership and authorship rights. More importantly, the documentation for how it integrated with the platform's most critical security features existed primarily in my head. I made a complete backup of everything, including my personal notes and design documents. A strange calm settled over me. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That wasn't my style. But I also wasn't going to make this easy for them. They wanted my system gone? Fine. They would learn exactly what they were losing. The next 3 months were a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. I was simultaneously crucial to our transition strategy and clearly on my way out. I sat through countless meetings where Elliot and his growing team of new hires dissected my work, often misunderstanding fundamental aspects of the architecture. The authentication module seems unnecessarily complex, one of the new developers commented during a code review session. We could replace this with a standard OAuth implementation. I had to bite my tongue. The authentication system was complex because it handled specialized access control for regulated industries, with automatic compliance logging that satisfied 3 different international standards. But explaining that would just label me as resistant to change. Instead, I dutifully documented everything they asked for, conducted knowledge transfer sessions, and answered questions. But I was selective about the depth I went into, especially regarding Parker Crypt. This encryption library, is this open source? Elliot asked one afternoon, frowning at his screen. No, it's proprietary, I replied carefully. Licensed to Northwell under specific terms. He made a note without looking up. We'll probably replace it with industry standard encryption, AES or something. I didn't bother explaining that Parker Crypt used a customized implementation of AES with additional security layers specifically designed for our data types. Again, what would be the point? As the transition progressed, I became increasingly isolated. My team was gradually reassigned to the modernization project. My input was required less and less frequently. I could feel myself being pushed to the margins. One Tuesday morning, I found myself alone at my desk, while everyone else was in a planning meeting I hadn't been invited to. My computer pinged with a calendar invitation. Transition planning, HR office, tomorrow, 10 a.m. So this was it. I spent the rest of the day organizing my personal items and downloading my work to an external drive. Nothing confidential or proprietary, just my own notes, designs, and the Parker Crypt documentation I'd written. The next morning, I met with Vanessa from HR and Marina. The conversation was predictably sterile. As the modernization project enters its next phase, we're restructuring the development organization, Vanessa explained, reading from what was clearly a prepared script. Unfortunately, your current role won't exist in the new structure. We want to thank you for your years of service, Marina added, not quite meeting my eyes. Your contribution to Northwell has been significant. I was offered a modest severance package, contingent on a 2-week transition period, and signing a standard non-disparagement agreement. Nothing about the proprietary encryption library or my continuing ownership rights. Either they hadn't read the licensing agreement, or they didn't think it mattered. Is there anything you'd like to discuss about the transition? Marina asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. I considered my options carefully. I could raise the issue of Parker Crypt now, making it clear that they didn't have rights to continue using it. I could demand additional compensation or threaten legal action. But something told me to wait. Let them discover the problem on their own. No, I said finally. I think everything's clear. For the final 2 weeks, I was the model departing employee. I documented additional systems, answered questions, and even helped troubleshoot a few issues with the prototype of the new platform. No one seemed to notice that I never fully explained how Parker Crypt integrated with the audit logging system or the customer data vault. On my last day, there was a small gathering in the break room. People I'd worked with for years shuffled awkwardly, ate cake, and made vague comments about keeping in touch. Marina made a brief appearance, thanked me again for my service, and disappeared back to her office. As I packed the last of my belongings, James stopped by my desk. "This place won't be the same without you," he said, genuine sadness in his voice. "No," I agreed. "It certainly won't." Life after Northwell was surprisingly peaceful. I took a month off, caught up on sleep, and reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my workaholic years. I updated my resume, but didn't immediately look for a new position. 12 years at one company had left me financially secure enough to be selective about my next move. Occasionally, I would receive LinkedIn messages from former colleagues, mostly casual check-ins. But about 2 months after my departure, the messages took on a different tone. "Hey Nadine, hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you remember how the compliance logging was configured for the financial services module? Having some issues with the audit trails?" I provided vague answers, nothing they couldn't have figured out from the documentation I'd left behind. But the questions kept coming, growing more frequent and more specific. Where exactly is the Parker Crypt integration documented? Do you have any notes on the custom credentialing protocols? Can you clarify how the token validation process interfaces with the encryption layer? I knew what was happening without being told. The new system was hitting roadblocks, specifically around the secure components built on Parker Crypt. Without detailed knowledge of my custom library, they were struggling to replicate its functionality. One evening, my phone rang, James's number. "Hey," I answered. "How's it going?" There was background noise on his end, voices raised in what sounded like a heated discussion. "It's a total disaster," he said, his voice low. "The new platform went live last week, and everything's falling apart. Authentication is failing across departments, we've got data leaking between client instances, and the compliance team is freaking out because the audit logs aren't capturing the required information." "That sounds serious," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Serious doesn't begin to cover it. We've got a major contract with Veltric Systems on hold because we can't prove compliance with their security requirements. Elliot is nowhere to be found. Literally, he's not responding to calls or emails. And Marina..." He lowered his voice further. "Marina is looking for someone to blame." I didn't respond immediately, digesting this information. Part of me felt vindicated. They'd disregarded my expertise and were now facing the consequences. But I'd spent 12 years building Northwell's platform. Despite everything, I didn't want to see it fail catastrophically. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "I hope they figure it out." "Nadine," James said, frustration evident in his voice. "You know they can't figure it out without you. Nobody understands how Parker Crypt works. We didn't even realize how central it was to the entire security architecture until everything started breaking." I remained silent. "They're going to call you," he continued. "Marina's been in meetings with the board all day. Just, when they do call, remember that not everyone agreed with how they treated you." After hanging up, I sat in my living room, thinking. This was exactly the scenario I'd anticipated, though perhaps sooner than expected. The question was, how would I respond when they reached out? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, my phone displayed Marina's name. I let it go to voicemail. She called twice more before sending a text. "Nadine, we need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the platform. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I didn't respond. Instead, I called my attorney, Catherine Williams. We'd worked together years ago when I was setting up the licensing for Parker Crypt, and I trusted her judgment. "They've backed themselves into a corner," she said after I explained the situation. "Legally, they can't continue using your library without a valid license. And practically, they can't fix their problems without your expertise. So what do you suggest?" "Let me handle the communication," Catherine said. "If you're willing to help them, we should formalize terms that recognize your value. And Nadine, your value just went up considerably." 3 days later, I sat across from Marina in a downtown law office, Catherine beside me. The conference room had that distinctive tension of lawyers trying to be cordial while preparing for battle. Marina's team included Northwell's general counsel and a representative from the board. Marina looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back severely. The platform meltdown was clearly taking its toll. "Let's be direct," Catherine began. "Northwell is currently using proprietary software licensed to them under specific terms. Those terms included Nadine's continued involvement with the platform. Since that relationship has been terminated, the license is effectively revoked." Northwell's lawyer frowned. "The software was developed while Ms. Parker was an employee." "As a separate project," Catherine interrupted, "with clear documentation establishing her ownership. I have the original licensing agreement here, signed by Northwell's previous CTO." She slid a document across the table. "You'll note paragraph 7 specifically addresses termination conditions." There was a tense silence as they reviewed the document. I watched Marina's face as the reality of the situation sank in. "Setting aside the legal technicalities," Marina said finally, "we have an immediate practical problem. Critical systems are failing. Client data is at risk. We need assistance restoring functionality." "And Nadine is prepared to provide that assistance," Catherine replied smoothly. "Under the right conditions." I listened as Catherine outlined our terms. A 6-month consulting retainer at triple my former salary, full authorship credit, and reinstated developer license ownership, and a formal acknowledgement of my role in the platform's architecture. Marina winced at the salary figure but didn't immediately reject it. The board representative leaned over to whisper something to her. After a brief discussion, Marina straightened in her chair. "We can agree to the financial terms," she said, "but the acknowledgement creates a complicated precedent." "It's not complicated at all," I interjected, speaking for the first time. "You're using my work. You're asking for my help. Acknowledge that publicly." The room fell silent again. I could see Marina calculating, weighing her pride against the mounting crisis at Northwell. "We'll need time to discuss internally," the board representative finally said. "Of course," Catherine replied. "But I should note that Nadine has received inquiries from other organizations. Her schedule is filling up quickly." It was a bluff, but an effective one. Marina's expression tightened. "Give us 24 hours, she said. They didn't need that long. By that evening, Catherine received a counterproposal that accepted most of our terms, with minor adjustments to the consulting timeline. After a brief discussion, I agreed. The next morning, I walked back into Northwell's offices, not as an employee, but as a consultant with clearly defined authority. The development team's relief was palpable. James actually hugged me when I arrived, whispering, "Thank God you're back." I spent the next week diagnosing and fixing the critical issues with the platform. It wasn't particularly challenging. Most of the problems stemmed from fundamental misunderstandings about how ParkerCrypt integrated with the other security modules. Once those were resolved, the system stabilized. What was most satisfying wasn't the generous consulting fee, or even the public acknowledgement of my work. It was watching the gradual realization spread across the organization that the legacy system they'd been so eager to replace wasn't outdated. It was sophisticated, purpose-built, and highly effective. Elliot never returned to Northwell. I heard through the grapevine that Marina quietly shelved the modernization project after my initial fixes proved successful. I completed my contracted work in just under a month, provided comprehensive documentation of ParkerCrypt, this time with no omissions, and walked out of Northwell for the second time. My reputation restored, and my future secure. 6 months after my consulting engagement with Northwell ended, I received an unexpected email from Jackson, the original founder. He'd been following the company from afar and had heard about the platform disaster through his network. "Incredible work," he wrote. "Not just the technical aspects, but how you handled the whole situation. It reminded me why I hired you in the first place." He was starting a new venture focused on secure logistics for healthcare suppliers and wanted to discuss a potential role. We met for coffee the following week. "I need someone who can build things right from the ground up," he explained. "Someone who understands that flashy isn't always better, and I'm prepared to offer equity this time." 2 weeks later, I joined Cypress Ember as Chief Technology Officer, with a substantial equity stake and a clear mandate to build secure, reliable systems, my way. Meanwhile, changes were happening at Northwell. Marina stepped down as CTO, citing personal reasons that everyone understood were related to the platform fiasco. The modernization project was officially canceled, and the company quietly began rebuilding around the original platform architecture, with proper credit given to its creator. My experience had made me something of a legend in Eugene's tech community. I was invited to speak at conferences about system architecture and security design. At one such event, I bumped into Elliot in the hallway. He was trying to pitch his services to a group of startup founders, using the same buzzwords and flashy slides. When he saw me, he quickly excused himself and disappeared into the crowd. The most satisfying moment came when Northwell's board chair reached out personally to apologize for how the situation had been handled, and to ask if I would consider joining the company's technical advisory board. I declined politely, explaining that my new role kept me fully occupied. "That's unfortunate," he said. "Your expertise would be invaluable." "Yes," I agreed. "It would." At Cypress Ember, I built a new platform with all the lessons learned from my years at Northwell. It was modern without being trendy, secure without being cumbersome, and, most importantly, fully documented and properly attributed. I assembled a team of developers who valued substance over style, thorough testing over rapid deployment. Instead of Elliot's approach of chasing every new technology trend, we focused on selecting the right tools for each specific task. When cloud solutions made sense, we used them. When traditional architecture was more appropriate, we weren't afraid to buck the trends. 1 year after joining Cypress Ember, we launched our platform. The healthcare logistics industry took notice immediately. Our security-first approach resonated strongly in a sector dealing with sensitive patient data and complex compliance requirements. Jackson and I had a clear vision: build something that worked exceptionally well, explain it clearly, and let the results speak for themselves. No buzzwords, no exaggerated claims, just solid technology solving real problems. Parker Crypt evolved too. I open-sourced a version of it, maintaining a proprietary extension for our specific needs at Cypress Ember. The open-source community embraced it, contributing improvements and expanding its capabilities. 3 years into this new chapter, Cypress Ember was acquired by a major healthcare technology provider. The valuation was heavily influenced by our platform's reputation for security and reliability. My equity stake meant I could retire if I wanted to, but the work was too satisfying to walk away from. I stayed on as CTO, with expanded responsibilities and a team that had grown from 5 to 50. Every new hire heard the story of Northwell, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in the value of building things right and standing up for your work. The acquisition made headlines in the industry press. Several former Northwell colleagues reached out to congratulate me, including James, who was now looking for a new opportunity himself. I hired him immediately. Looking back on my journey from Northwell to Cypress Ember, I realized that true success wasn't about fighting against change, but about standing firmly in the value of your work. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting your code speak for itself.